Hello and welcome to a journey into a world that once lived in the shadow of its own imagination. Imagine a land where the boundaries between belief and fear were so thin that a gust of winter wind could be mistaken for a curse, where illness, storm, or misfortune seemed to arrive not by chance but by the hidden hand of someone whispering in the dark. Picture a medieval village, no libraries, no laboratories, no maps of the invisible forces shaping the world. By all logic, such a society should not have been able to make sense of its own fears, should not have survived the storms of superstition, famine, plague, and accusation that swept through it. And yet for centuries it did. It endured. It built rituals, laws, myths, and entire institutions shaped around a single idea. This is the story of witches and wizards, not of fantasy, but of real medieval Europe where belief had the weight of iron and suspicion could ignite like dry straw. How did people come to fear their neighbors more than demons? How did a whisper become evidence and a dream become a death sentence? How did entire kingdoms allow shadows to govern their court? Tonight we walk through a world where superstition shaped law, where magic was not entertainment but accusation, where the night sky was a map of omens and where the line between healer and heretic was as thin as parchment. Here we explore fear as a weapon, belief as a refuge, power wrapped in ritual, and the quiet human cost of medieval superstition. But before we begin, breathe slowly. Let the noise of the present fall away like dust from an old cloak. The torches dim, the world softens, and through the hush of distant bells we travel back to a time when the scent of damp earth, cold stone, and burning tallow guided every step, and the candles trembled not from the wind, but from what people believed lived within it. The village beneath the brooding sky. The medieval world opens not with a scream, but with a quiet uncertainty. Life in the villages was held together by routine dawn laughter at the well, the scrape of hose on soil, the murmured prayers of mothers over cooking pots. Yet beneath this rhythm lay an anxiety older than scripture. People feared the unseen because it explained the unexplainable. A poor harvest, a child's fever, a neighbor's sudden fortune, each became threads in a web of suspicion. Every community had someone whispered about, a widow who lived near the woods, a shepherd who talked to his animals as if they spoke back, a midwife who knew herbs far too well. These were ordinary people carrying extraordinary burdens, the burden of being different in a time when difference breathed danger. Villagers believed the world was full of forces watching them, so they watched each other. This was the seedbed of witchcraft accusations, not malice but fear born of uncertainty. And over time that fear hardened into custom. The healer who walked the edge. Long before the courts hunted witches, the villagers relied on those who knew how to mend life's wounds. Herbalists, midwives, and charm makers were necessary yet suspicious. They ground roots into salves that soothed fevers. They whispered protective prayers while tying amulets for newborns. Their craft came from generations who had studied forests as carefully as monks studied scripture. But knowledge carried risk. A healer's success brought gratitude, her failure brought accusation. When a mother's child lived, the healer was blessed. When another's child died, the same healer might be cursed. Such was the paradox of the medieval mind, depending on a person while fearing the very power that made them useful. Many healers walked a narrow path, always aware that a misinterpreted gesture, an uncanny cure, or a poorly timed glance at the moon could transform them from caretaker to suspect. Their world was a balance between service and survival, and the slightest tremor in that balance could plunge them into danger. The whisper networks of the night witchcraft did not begin in courts. It began in the quiet hours among villagers, huddled around fires, sharing stories that blurred memory with imagination. A cow that stopped giving milk, a dream of a shadowy figure standing by a door, a child crying through the night. These became stories retold until they solidified into warnings. Rumor became explanation. explanation became fear. Fear became blame. The medieval night was thick with interpretation. Every howl of a wolf carried meaning. Every gust of wind hinted at unseen company. Every ill-timed misfortune looked like someone's intention. Suspicion lived in the rafters of households, in the marketplaces, in the warmth of taverns. And sometimes neighbors spoke another's name too softly or too often, and that was how a story began. A story that could end in the darkest ways. Yet these whispers were also a survival mechanism. They gave shape to anxieties that otherwise felt too large to hold. They were a shield and a blade. The age before the burning. The early medieval centuries were not yet an age of mass hunts, not yet. Accusations remained, local quiet, half-believed even by those who whispered them. The church oscillated between dismissing witchcraft as superstition and condemning it as heresy. Kings and lords focused on land and war, not the fears of villagers. But the soil was ready. Europe waited like a storm-gathering force over distant seas. All it needed was pressure, a series of calamities, a shift in authority, the tightening of doctrine to turn whispers into weapons. That transformation would come. But for now, in this first moment of our long journey, we stand in a world where fear flickers like candlelight, present, unstable, waiting to ignite. And everything begins here, in the quiet trembling of a flame, in a room where no wind should be. The night the priest looked. Twice. A single moment often alters the course of an age. In one small parish, it could have been in Burgundy or Saxony or the rolling hills of the Swiss cantons, a priest kneels to pray after a night of unrelenting storms. Lightning has torn through the sky. Chimneys toppled. Livestock scattered. A child died in its sleep. In a world before meteorology, the priest seeks meaning, not patterns. And as he prays, he recalls something the villagers had muttered hours earlier. A woman seen walking alone during the storm. A woman the rain seemed to avoid. A woman whose eyes reflected the lightning before the lightning struck. He knows these are rumors. He knows storms belong to nature. Yet in this fragile century, reason is not a wall, only a curtain that moves when belief breathes upon it. So the priest does what many will soon do. He begins to look twice at the world. Twice at his congregation. Twice at the stories shared in the dark. This is how witchcraft begins to shift from folklore to something more formal, not because the world changed, but because its interpreters began to see through different lenses. A storm becomes a sign. A misfortune becomes a clue. A woman becomes an answer. And the answers grow sharper every year. The lawmakers of fear. Europe's early medieval legal codes barely mention sorcery. When they do, it is treated as a curiosity, a superstition, a leftover echo of ancient pagan rituals. But this begins to change. Kings, bishops, and magistrates start hearing one too many stories. Omens in the sky, cattle dying in clusters, strange markings near doorways, mutterings of people claiming to know secrets they should not know. Lawmakers dislike uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens order. So they start to write new lines into their codices, clauses that punish the use of charms, clauses that forbid maleficium, harmful magic, clauses that identify those who consort with spirits. These laws are not yet thorough. They are not yet terrifying, but they are seeds. And medieval Europe is rich soil for seeds of fear. Each new code gives structure to suspicion. Each rule gives legitimacy to rumor. Each parchment-bound directive gives officials permission to intervene where before they would have shrugged and turned away. What once lived in folklore begins to exist in ink. Ink lasts longer than fear and often outlives those it condemns. The wandering scholars of the dark arts. Across the continent, another force shapes the coming centuries, the rise of traveling scholars. They study ancient Greek texts on demons, Roman manuals on augury, early Christian writings about angels, and fallen beings. They do not hunt witches, they classify ideas, but their work leaves an unintended mark. These scholars link folk magic with heresy. They describe the cosmos as a battlefield of invisible forces. They revive old superstitions through academic language, giving intellectual weight to anxieties villagers already held. A shepherd may fear a curse, but when a monk claims demons stalk the countryside, the fear becomes doctrine. Learned men create new hierarchies of supernatural dangers, diagrams, treatises, lectures delivered in cold stone cloisters, and though their tone is meant to be scholarly, the villagers hear something different: confirmation. Someone in the world is capable of harm. Someone does walk with knowledge of darkness. Someone must be responsible when nature turns cruel. These scholars do not know it yet, but they are building the vocabulary of witch hunts. Words are powerful, especially when spoken by those whom society trusts. The forest of signs. As fear gains structure, the natural world becomes a canvas for interpretation. A raven circling at dusk, a ring of mushrooms after rain, a fox crying near the village gate. These become more than happenings, they become signs. The medieval mind did not separate the physical from the spiritual. Every breeze carried intention, every shadow held presence, every sickness hinted at its author. Villagers begin to walk differently through forests, more slowly, more carefully, scanning the branches for subtle indicators that a witch has passed through: a broken twig, a footprint facing the wrong direction, wax drippings on a tree trunk where no candle should have been. Patterns emerge, then interpretations, then suspicions. The world itself becomes a witness, though it testifies only through symbols that change shape from one village to the next. Fear does not require consistency. It only requires repetition. The first accused. There is no record of the first medieval witch accusation. History rarely preserves the smallest tragedies, but somewhere in a valley now forgotten, in a hamlet swallowed by time, the first formal charge is spoken aloud. A name is said in the presence of an authority. A reason is given, subtle or desperate. A story is woven from storm, sickness, and coincidence, and for the first time someone is taken aside, questioned, weighed not by actions but by impressions. The tone is gentle at first. Accusations are cautious, half embarrassed. The community still hesitates to believe that any among them could hold such power, yet once the words are spoken they cannot be unsaid. Fear becomes real, and the accused becomes a symbol, a vessel, for anxieties that villagers cannot articulate. Whether that first person was punished or released does not matter. What matters is that a door opened. A door that would grow wide enough in time to swallow tens of thousands. The slow gathering of a storm. The century closes not with a scream but with a tension thickening in the air, like clouds brooding just beyond the horizon. The laws grow stricter, the scholars grow more confident, the priests grow more vigilant, the villagers grow more anxious. Something is coming. Not yet a hunt, not yet an inquisition, but a shift in the worldview of an entire civilization. The candles in Europe's homes tremble a little more often now. And even though no wind stirs, people begin to believe they know why. Belief becomes certainty. Certainty becomes fear. Fear begins to reach for power. Before long, it will find it. The magistrates' table. The first courts to hear witchcraft claims were not grand chambers. They were modest rooms filled with the smell of damp parchment oak beams and the lingering chill of unlit hearths. A magistrate sits behind a rough-hewn table, its surface scarred by years of verdicts and disagreements. Before him stands a villager, hesitant, shivering, clutching a cap in trembling fingers. The accusation is small at first. A curse whispered at a market stall, a sudden illness in a cow, a feeling someone's eyes lingered too long. The magistrate listens because he must. The law now commands attention to matters once dismissed as folklore, but he listens also because listening grants him authority. His role is shifting from mediator of disputes to interpreter of fear. He asks questions that seem harmless. Who told you this? Who else believes it? What signs did you see? The villager answers with the soft, uncertain cadence of someone mapping a fear into words. By the end of the conversation, nothing is proven. Yet nothing is dismissed. The magistrate writes notes in the margin of a ledger, a name, a suspicion, a possibility. The ink dries slowly, but the idea dries quickly. Every recorded worry becomes a stepping stone toward a future none of them can yet see. The mark of misfortune. As courts grow more attentive, villagers begin to bring evidence that cannot be touched, evidence made of coincidence, grief, and imagination. A girl falls ill suddenly, a woman is blamed, a barn collapses in a night storm. A man claims he saw a cloaked figure near the beams the evening before. A baby is born, weak, struggling to breathe. Neighbors murmur about a strange dream the mother had. These misfortunes were once endured in silence or soothed through ritual. Now they acquire legal implications. To the medieval mind, misfortune rarely occurred without cause. If God allowed suffering, someone must be responsible. And if that responsibility could not be found in earthly actions, then perhaps it lay in invisible ones. Thus the concept of the mark emerges not yet the infamous physical witch's mark of later centuries, but a more subtle notion, the mark of misfortune on a particular life, the aura of calamity that surrounds a certain person. People start to believe that some individuals attract disaster the way iron attracts rust. And once a community decides that someone carries such a mark, every storm cloud in their direction looks intentional. The church weighs its words. The church's relationship with witchcraft in these early centuries is uneasy. Some clerics call all sorcery illusion. Others call it demonic reality. Most stand somewhere in between, uncertain, cautious. Yet the church cannot ignore the rising tide of fear. People seek guidance. They demand explanations. They want scripture to make sense of their terror. So sermons change. Priests begin to warn of those who consult the shadows. They speak of temptations whispered in dreams. They mention the dangers of stepping outside God's protection. These are not yet calls for persecution. They are cautionary notes, but their impact is profound. When a priest names a danger from the pulpit, it becomes real. When he suggests vigilance, the villagers feel responsible. When he hints that invisible forces walk among them, the villagers begin searching for footprints. And when he describes the devil as an opportunist lurking near the morally weak, well, the villagers know exactly who in the community fits that description. Without ever intending to, the church helps carve pathways for suspicion to travel. Not yet persecution, but preparation. The midwife's burden. If any group feels the tightening of suspicion most deeply, it is the midwives. They are the guardians of life's most fragile moments. They know herbs, poultices, birthing positions. They hold infants who may not breathe. They touch those who hover between life and death. This knowledge, once respected, begins to gather shadows. A midwife saves a child, she must have used magic. A midwife cannot save a child, she must have withheld magic. Their skill becomes a double-edged blade, sharpened by fear. Neighbors seek their help, but keep their distance. Gratitude becomes cautious. Praise becomes whispered. And the midwives feel the world turning beneath their feet, feel the weight of centuries-old respect shifting into a new kind of wariness. The healer and the witch now stand perilously close in the medieval imagination. One misfortune, one difficult birth, one misunderstood gesture, and the midwife may find herself on the wrong side of a magistrate's ledger. Her fate depends not on her craft, but on the community's mood. When communities begin to divide. As courts grow bolder and sermons grow sharper, villages begin to change. Where once people lived in tangled webs of cooperation, now those webs fray. Trust becomes selective. Memory becomes evidence. Old grudges resurface with new vocabulary. People start to look at one another differently, not as neighbors but as potential threats. The woman who sings while gathering firewood. The man who speaks softly to animals. The widow who collects herbs at dusk. The child who dreams too vividly. These personalities once added color to community life. Now they become reasons for caution. Lines shift. Conversations soften. doors close earlier in the evening. A village may still look peaceful in the daylight, but the air is thick at night, filled with glances, hesitations, the sound of people walking faster past certain homes. These divisions are quiet, almost invisible, but they are the fault lines along which future earthquakes will tear through Europe, and they grow deeper each month. The quiet turning of the century. As the century draws toward its midpoint, something profound has changed. People are learning to interpret the world through suspicion. Not yet with violence, not yet with fire, but with an alertness that feeds on itself. Authorities now listen, laws now acknowledge, sermons now warn, communities now divide. Fear has structure, structure has authority, authority has momentum, and momentum is what history uses to turn quiet worries into catastrophes. For now the candles tremble only slightly, but soon their flames will lean sharply in one direction, not because of wind, but because millions of hands will reach to adjust them. 1 century from this moment, Europe will burn. But tonight the transformation is still gentle, still hidden in the corners of taverns, in the creases of parish records, in the silence of magistrates' rooms. The storm is coming, and Europe has just begun to listen for it. The book that changed the night. In a modest scriptorium lit by wavering candles, a monk bends over parchment. He translates older texts, fragments from Augustine scraps, from ancient Roman law sermons, from forgotten bishops. His task is simple: compile teachings on sin. But he makes a choice that will echo across centuries. He adds a chapter on maleficium, the harmful arts, not because witches roam the countryside, but because the world is looking for language to describe its fears. He writes that sorcery is a temptation of the devil. He writes that those who consort with spirits place their souls at risk. He writes that moral weakness invites supernatural danger. He does not know it, but his book will travel farther than he ever will. It will be copied by other monks, stored in parish chests, quoted in sermons, and used by magistrates who seek clarity on this growing anxiety. The book is not a weapon, but it is a blueprint. Fear, once fluid and formless, now begins to solidify into doctrine, and doctrine endures. The village of half-beliefs. As these ideas spread, medieval villages enter a strange twilight between certainty and doubt. People do not fully believe that witches walk among them, but they no longer fully believe they do not. This space between belief and disbelief is fertile ground for anxiety. A villager sees a strange pattern of frost on a window and wonders if it is a sign. A shepherd hears an owl call 3 times and pauses before returning to his flock. A mother prays more fervently when her child coughs in the night. These are not yet witch hunts. They are the prelude, the tuning of human nerves. Fear becomes a habit. Interpretation becomes instinct, and each instinct deepens the grooves that future centuries will follow. In these half-believing villages, life continues with its usual chores: spinning wool, tending fields, repairing roofs. But beneath the mundane rhythm beats a subtle suspicion. People begin to watch not what others do, but what others are capable of. And that is how fear gains its sharpest edge, not through events, but through imagination. The Lord who wanted order. Far above the concerns of peasants, lords, and nobles, begin to take notice of rising unrest. A manor lord hears conflicting stories from his subjects. Someone's crops failed. Someone's child fell ill. Someone's dream felt ominous. Small complaints, but many of them. In a world dependent on productivity, fear is an enemy of order. Fear slows fields. Fear disrupts labor. Fear makes tenants harder to manage. So the Lord calls for a new kind of oversight. He demands that his stewards document suspicious behavior. He instructs priests to preach obedience as protection against dark influences. He even asks neighboring estates if they too have heard rumors of hexes and charms. The Lord does not believe in witches. What he believes in is discipline. But by giving structure to fear, he legitimizes it. By controlling superstition, he strengthens it. His records strange notes about odd villagers, strange dreams, inexplicable ailments, become some of the earliest administrative files on witchcraft. What was once mere rumor is now documented reality. Not proof, but the illusion of proof. And illusions often lead armies. The fires that were not for witches. Despite the rising tension, Europe's pyres in this age are lit for different reasons. Heretics, political foes, criminals. The smoke rising from castle walls and village squares is not yet from witchcraft accusations, but the sight of these flames is shaping minds. People learn that punishment can be horrifyingly public. They learn that sin carries consequences too visible to ignore. They learn that the authorities possess fire not merely as a tool, but as a symbol. This imagery bleeds into the collective imagination. If heresy can burn, could sorcery burn too? If the body can be punished for invisible crimes, could the same approach apply to invisible dangers? The people do not yet know they are preparing themselves for a future they will come to fear. But the human mind is tender. It absorbs. It anticipates. The sight of flames licking at wooden stakes plants a seed. There are evils that must be destroyed, not forgiven. A century from now, those flames will have new fuel. But tonight, they crackle only as shadows of what is to come. The cartographer of nightmares. In an abbey surrounded by mist, a scholar studies strange testimonies. Dreams, hallucinations, visions of demons perched at the foot of beds. He maps them. On parchment, he draws diagrams of the spiritual world, spheres, circles, hierarchies of unseen beings. He believes he is categorizing temptations. He has no intention of accusing anyone, but once he publishes his work, villagers and priests alike begin to see their fears reflected in these charts. People now have a cosmology of dread. Nightmares become warnings, sleepwalking becomes evidence, a vision becomes a threat. The scholar never meant to build a prison of imagination, yet his diagrams become invisible walls around countless lives. It is a cautionary tale of the medieval world. Knowledge often expands fear instead of dispelling it. The unsettling calm before the transformation. By the close of this era, Europe still has not launched a witch hunt. No mass trials, no panicked purges, no burning fields or crowds roaring for blood. Instead, there is a calm, a deceptive calm like the stillness before the first crack of a thunderstorm. Authorities are preparing, communities are dividing, scholars are formalizing belief, clergy are sharpening their warnings, villagers are whispering more often than they speak aloud. In this hush, history gathers momentum. The candle flames flicker more nervously now, not because of a breeze, but because Europe is learning to fear itself. What begins in the next century will not be a sudden explosion. It will be a slow awakening, a realization that the tools for a great darkness are already in place. And once awakened, Europe will never again be able to unsee the shadows it has taught itself to name. The trial that should not have mattered. In a stone hall smelling of damp wool and extinguished torches, a minor case unfolds. A farmer accuses his neighbor of casting a harmful charm. The evidence is pitifully thin: a dead goat, a quarrel over a boundary stone, a strange dream the accuser had. The magistrate, weary and uninterested, considers dismissing the case entirely. But a local priest is present, and he insists that the testimony must be heard. So the trial proceeds. The accused woman stands before them pale but calm. She admits to owning herbs, a normal thing for any household. She admits to muttering a prayer over her sick nephew, a common act of devotion. She denies the charge of sorcery, as anyone would. There is no drama, no shouting, no sinister discoveries. In the end, the magistrate offers a simple judgment: no proof. Case closed, everyone may go, and yet this small forgettable trial changes the entire region. Because the priest leaves the courtroom unsettled. He senses that something was missed, something unspoken. His mind turns to the new treatises, the newly copied sermons, the diagrams of invisible dangers. He writes to the bishop. He urges caution. He describes the trial as a warning sign. What was a trivial dispute becomes a seed of doctrine, not because the woman was guilty, but because the priest feared she might have been. In this century, that possibility becomes powerful enough to shape policies. Fear is learning to speak in official language. The circle of learned men. In larger towns, gatherings of scholars become more common. They debate theology, law, and the nature of the unseen. Some argue that witches do not exist. Others argue they exist but rarely. Still others insist they walk among the people, subtle and dangerous. These debates, once academic, begin to influence the world beyond cloister walls. A bishop hears one argument and instructs his priests to be vigilant. A magistrate reads a copied manuscript and begins to treat rumors more seriously. A wealthy merchant sponsors a new compilation of teachings that link sorcery with heresy. The language grows more complex, packed with spirits. Invisible maleficium. Signs hidden in the natural world. Intentions corrupting the divine order. The scholars believe they are refining truth. What they are really doing is refining fear. Words become sharper. Definitions become narrower. The net grows tighter, even though no one yet sees that they are weaving a net at all. This is the century when ideas begin to harden around witchcraft like frost on winter branches, not yet lethal, but unmistakably forming. The children who dreamed too vividly. Children have always dreamed of strange things, animals, speaking lights moving in the forest, figures gliding across the edges of sleep. But now these dreams start to matter. A frightened boy tells his parents that he saw a shadow standing at the foot of his bed. A girl claims she heard a voice whispering her name as she fell asleep. Another child wakes, screaming, describing a creature with burning eyes. These dreams are not new. What is new is the way adults react. Instead of soothing, they interpret. Instead of dismissing, they observe. Instead of comforting, they fear. Soon parents visit priests to seek guidance on their children's nightmares. And priests, influenced by scholars' writings, begin to categorize these dreams, temptations, visitations, warnings. The children do not know what their words are shaping. But with each retelling, with each parent's trembling confession, with each priest's careful questioning, the idea that the invisible world is encroaching gains strength. Fear learns to speak through the mouths of the young. And once spoken, these stories linger in the corners of household walls. The plague that was not witchcraft. Yet a wave of sickness sweeps through a cluster of villages. It is not the Black Death that horror is still centuries away, but it is severe enough to shake communities. People fall ill one after another. Coughs echo in narrow streets, bodies weaken, households grieve. The villagers seek explanations, for now they do not blame witches. Disease is still understood as God's will, or the result of foul air, or the judgment brought by sin. But the plague changes something subtle. It normalizes fear. It teaches communities how to react collectively to danger. It teaches authorities how to impose controls. It teaches priests how to interpret suffering through moral narratives. Most importantly, it teaches villagers that calamity can come without warning, and once they learn that, they begin to prepare explanations for future catastrophes. Witchcraft does not yet fill this space, but the space has been created. In a generation it will be filled. The old woman in the last cottage. Every village has someone who lives just beyond its rhythm, a solitary aging figure who walks more slowly, speaks more seldom, knows more secrets about herbs, animals, or the changing seasons. She is not feared, not yet, but she is noticed. A cow dies unexpectedly. Someone recalls seeing her at the edge of the pasture. A baby falls ill. Someone remembers her muttering to herself at the well. A man dreams of ravens. Someone whispers that she feeds birds from her window. The villagers do not confront her. They do not shout. They do not accuse. They simply watch. And in the watching, something shifts. A look, a pause, a silence. These simple changes form the earliest threads of social isolation, the first quiet step in the mechanics of future accusations. A person becomes a symbol. A symbol becomes a threat. A threat becomes a story told in hushed tones. This woman is not yet called a witch. She is simply a possibility. And in this century, possibilities are beginning to matter as much as facts. The stage being built in secret. By the end of this era, Europe still has no mass hunts, not yet. Instead, it has created something more dangerous, an intellectual and emotional infrastructure, a network of beliefs, laws, fears, and symbols that fit together like pieces of a weapon waiting to be assembled. Clergy are more watchful, courts are more attentive, villagers are more suspicious, scholars are more confident in their definitions, authorities are more willing to intervene. Everything is in place. All that is missing is the spark. A famine, a war, a plague, a charismatic preacher, a frightened community. Any of these could ignite the tinder gathered piece by piece over the past century. And when it ignites, Europe will not understand how the blaze spread so quickly. Tonight, the world still sleeps in relative calm, but the shadows have begun to speak, and the people have begun to listen. The storm is no longer distant. It is approaching quietly beneath the surface of daily life. Soon it will break. The road between two villages. A narrow road cuts through a forest dense with mist. Along this path walks a merchant named Geralt, carrying wool and spices from one village to the next. He is no scholar, no priest, no magistrate, only a man who hears many stories. On this evening he pauses at a tavern. Villagers tell him of strange lights above a marsh, of a woman who speaks to crows, of a child who recovered after a charm whispered at his bedside. Geralt listens politely. He has heard such tales before, but in the next village, only a day's walk away, he hears the same stories with different names, different details, but unmistakably the same framework: lights, curses, uncanny recoveries, unsettling dreams. This is new. Folklore once belonged exclusively to the place where it was born. Now it travels, it adapts, it grows. Geralt becomes an accidental courier of fear, repeating stories he has heard without meaning harm. Yet his words lace the two villages together with a thread of shared anxiety. Within months, more travelers repeat these tales. Within years, the network of stories spans entire regions. Fear has begun to walk the roads, and once it walks, it does not stop. The priest who could not ignore patterns. Father Aldred is young, thoughtful, and deeply devoted. He has studied in modest cathedral schools where scholars debate demons and dreams, visions and virtue. His education taught him caution, not belief. Yet as he travels between parishes, he hears troubling consistencies. A woman blamed for a drought, another blamed for a fever, another for a cow's miscarriage. Each village insists its troubles are unique. But Aldred sees connections, the same symbols, the same accusations, the same terror cloaked in piety. He begins taking notes. He writes names, dates, misfortunes, dreams, rumors. He marks similarities with careful strokes of ink. His intention is noble, to understand fear so he might calm it. But his notebook does something unintended. It organizes superstition into a coherent narrative. When fear finds structure, it finds strength. Aldred's writings spread among other clergy. Some see them as warnings, others see them as proof. And slowly, gently, without meaning, to the church's imagination shifts. No longer do priests see isolated stories, they see patterns. And patterns demand responses. The steward's ledger of peculiarities. On a large estate overseen by a steward named Rolf, a new kind of record begins to emerge. Alongside taxes, harvest tallies and disputes over grazing rights, Rolf starts noting anomalies. A woman who collected herbs by moonlight, a shepherd whose sheep refused to approach him, a student who draws symbols in the dirt, a widow who never attends mass, a field where crops fail despite healthy soil. These entries are not accusations, they are simply observations. But observation once written becomes official. Rolf's list circulates among neighboring stewards who begin their own lists. These lists travel to lords who compile summaries. Those summaries reach bishops who write recommendations for vigilance. From these quiet ledgers born of curiosity, more than malice emerges a subtle transformation. Suspicion becomes administrative. Fear becomes part of governance. and governance endures long after individual fears fade. The strange case of the black hen. In a rural village, a farmer wakes one morning to find his prized hen, dead feathers, scattered, body-cold eyes clouded. This should be nothing. Animals die, foxes prowl, life is fragile, but the farmer's neighbor remarks that he saw a woman walking past the coop the night before. Another neighbor mentions that she keeps odd hours. A third notes that she once helped cure a fever that doctors could not. The villagers gather. Voices sharpen, stories connect. They decide to consult the new priest, a cautious man who has read Aldrid's notes, who has listened to traveling merchants, who has seen similar reports elsewhere. He asks them questions. Did the woman seem strange? Did the hen die suddenly? Has anyone else suffered misfortune? The villagers answer with half-truths and trembling certainty. The priest hesitates. He does not want to accuse, he does not want to judge. But he also feels responsible. He feels the weight of this new vigilance. He instructs the villagers to remain watchful. The woman is not punished, not yet. But the word watchful follows her through the village like a shadow that cannot be shrugged off. Fear has acquired a tone of authority, and authority gives fear legitimacy. When dreams become testimony, it begins with a girl named Lisa. She wakes crying in the night, claiming she saw a figure standing by her door, a figure with long hair and a face she could not see. The village priest listens gently. He comforts her. He tells her dreams are not always meaningful. But Lisa insists she smelled smoke on the figure's clothing. And the next morning, a neighbor's barn burns to the ground. The coincidence is too much for the villagers to ignore. Not when the air is already thick with suspicion. Other children begin speaking of dreams, some real, some imagined, some shaped by overheard whispers. The adults listen. Dreams become stories, stories become warnings, warnings become evidence. This is the first century when imagination gains a voice at the table of judgment. Children do not understand their power, but the community does, and what the community believes it enforces. The tension that creeps like winter frost. There are no mass trials yet, no pyres, no frantic hunts, but there is something more insidious, a shift in everyday consciousness. People greet each other politely, yet with caution. They pray more earnestly, yet with more fear. They whisper more often, yet trust less deeply. The village feels colder, though the seasons are unchanged. The forests feel thicker, though the trees have not grown. The nights feel longer, though the moon still rises at its appointed time. Fear has become a companion, silent, attentive, patient. It does not yet point fingers, but it watches, it waits, it gathers stories, names impressions. And it is learning slowly, deliberately, how to turn those impressions into action. This century is the quiet tightening of a rope. The hunts will come later. But their roots are here, curling through the soil of daily life. The candles tremble a little harder now. Not because of a breeze, but because Europe is inhaling, preparing for a moment when it will exhale violence. The storm stands just beyond the horizon. Soon it will step into view. The magistrate who asked one question. Too many? In a small town nestled between forest and river, Magistrate Otto sits in judgment over a case that begins like dozens before it. A man claims his cow fell ill. He suspects foul play. He hints hesitantly at sorcery. In the past, Otto would have dismissed such an accusation. He knows cows die of disease. He knows villagers quarrel. He knows fear can invent enemies. But this century has reshaped his worldview. He has read recent treatises. He has heard warnings from bishops. He has received letters from neighboring courts urging vigilance. So instead of dismissing the claim, Otto asks a question he has never asked before. Has she behaved strangely of late? The man nods eagerly. Yes, she mutters to herself. Yes, she stirs herbs at odd hours. Yes, she walks alone by the river at dawn. Otto feels a shift he cannot name. The moment is small, barely perceptible. But it marks a turning point, the first step from reluctance into curiosity, from curiosity into possibility. The case ends without punishment. There is no conviction. The accused woman returns home unharmed, yet something irreversible has happened. A magistrate has begun looking for signs, and once a judge begins to look, the world begins to change. The parish that wanted answers. In a hillside parish surrounded by wheat and barley, the villagers gather after Mass. A boy has fallen ill with a mysterious fever. His mother insists she saw a shadow at the foot of his bed. Another villager recalls hearing footsteps at night. The priest, Father Wenslaus, listens carefully. He is cautious, educated, skeptical, but he is also human, molded by the same stories shaping the rest of Europe. When the villagers ask if the devil can work through ordinary people, he hesitates. He does not want to frighten them. He does not want to accuse unjustly. But he has read new theological writings. He has heard bishops speak of rising dangers. He has seen fear tighten its grip on other communities. So he answers, "It is possible." These three words ripple through the parish like cold water poured over warm stones. Fear finds a foothold. Conversations in doorways lengthen. People begin recalling odd glances, strange habits, unexplained events. Father Wenslaus regrets his words almost immediately, but fear, once voiced, cannot be withdrawn. It becomes a participant in the life of the parish. The meeting in the market square. In a bustling market town where traders from distant regions converge, an unusual council forms. Merchants, craftsmen, priests, and minor officials gather to discuss an increasing number of complaints that sound eerily similar despite coming from different corners of the region. Milk spoiling overnight. Barn doors swinging open without wind. Children waking to describe the same figure. Sudden blights on crops. The council listens with concern, not because they believe every story, but because they recognize a pattern. Patterns command action, so they draft a set of precautionary measures: increased watchfulness over solitary individuals, inquiries into unlicensed healers, reporting of nighttime wanderers, questioning those who perform rites outside the church's guidance. No one intends malice, no one seeks accusation. They believe they are protecting their town. But these measures will soon give ordinary villagers the tools to turn suspicion into claims. Fear now has guidelines. Guidelines turn into procedures. Procedures turn into habits. And habits can reshape the fate of entire generations. The blacksmith's wife. In a northern village where winter lasts longer than it should, a small tragedy unfolds. A blacksmith's wife, Marta, is known for her kindness. She shares bread with the hungry. She tends to the sick. She sings while she works. But after her youngest child dies of a fever, a grief from which she never fully returns, she begins withdrawing. She speaks less. She walks alone along forest paths. She lights candles at odd hours. The villagers grow uneasy. No one accuses her. They still respect her. They mourn with her. But they also wonder. One day, a storm tears off half the roof of a neighbor's barn. People whisper that Marta was seen gazing at the sky shortly before it happened. Another day, a flock of geese circles the village twice before vanishing. Someone mutters that Marta hummed a strange tune that morning. These are coincidences. Grief made visible. Routines altered by loss. But the villagers no longer interpret behavior with compassion. They interpret it with caution. And Marta feels the change. The space around her grows colder. Doors no longer open as quickly. Children are called inside when she walks by. She has done nothing wrong. Her life is simply unfolding in the wrong century. A century where sorrow can be mistaken for danger. The birth of the first searchers. Across multiple regions, communities begin forming small groups, not hunters, not judges, merely watchmen of behavior. They call themselves searchers. Their tasks are simple. Observe those who seem unusual. keep notes, report patterns, gather testimony when misfortune strikes. Their stated purpose is prevention, to help authorities make informed decisions. But their presence changes everything. Where once villagers kept quiet about doubts, now they speak. Where once suspicions remained internal, now they are recorded. Where once rumors died quickly, now they are preserved. A searcher's notebook becomes a powerful object. A misplaced word, an uncharitable interpretation, a misunderstood gesture, any of these can travel from page to pulpit, from pulpit to court. The machinery of accusation is not yet running, but its gears are being fitted together one by one. The searchers think they are maintaining order. What they are really building is infrastructure. Europe on the verge. As this century draws onward, the shift becomes impossible to ignore. Accusations no longer come only from frightened individuals. Clergy no longer dismiss spiritual dangers. Magistrates no longer require proof to ask questions. Communities no longer assume innocence. Fear no longer travels alone. It is accompanied by process, by documentation, by authority. Europe is not yet hunting witches, but it has learned how to prepare for the possibility. The doors to fear have cracked open. Light spills in half illumination, half distortion. Soon these doors will open fully, not because people want them to, but because the storm that has been gathering for centuries is about to break. And when it does, the quiet, cautious Europe of today will become unrecognizable. The candles tremble more violently now, not because of wind, but because the world is inhaling deeply, preparing to step into the age of accusation. The girl in the orchard. It begins with an orchard, a quiet stretch of apple trees nestled behind a village that rarely sees trouble. A young girl collapses among the branches. Her body trembles, her eyes roll back. Her voice cries out words no one understands. Her father lifts her terrified. The villagers gather. Someone suggests she is ill. Someone else suggests heat stroke. But another villager, one who has read new tracts on demonic influence, whispers, she is touched by something unnatural. The girl recovers, slowly, weak and confused. She remembers nothing. But rumors remember everything. What happened in that orchard spreads across the village by nightfall. By morning, it has traveled to neighboring parishes. Within weeks, merchants carry the tale to far-off towns. And in every retelling, the story grows sharper. The orchard becomes a place of dark influence. The girl's collapse becomes a possession. The villagers' caution becomes fear of a witch living among them. No one knows which part of the story is true, but truth no longer matters. Interpretation has become the axis on which the world turns. The orchard will later be abandoned, left to rot under a pall of superstition. People will swear they hear whispers there after dusk. But the true whispers began long before in the minds of those desperate to explain what they feared. The council that chose to act. In a modest town surrounded by stone walls and fertile fields, a council meets in haste. For months they have heard similar stories from different parishes. Strange fits, sudden illnesses, livestock dying without cause, children speaking of shadowy figures, herbs found arranged in unsettling patterns. Each case alone might be dismissed. But taken together they form a mosaic of dread. The council debates deep into the night. Some want to stay cautious, some want to intervene, some sense opportunity, the chance to establish authority by addressing a growing popular fear. In the end, they create a new position, the Inspector of Unusual Affairs. A man named Dietrich Stern, of face and measured of voice, is appointed. His task is simple in theory: investigate any claims that appear suspicious. In practice, his role becomes transformational. Dietrich travels from village to village, listening to tales, documenting oddities, asking questions that give shape to uncertain fears. Who did she speak to last? Who has quarreled with her recently? What signs preceded the misfortune? These questions grant legitimacy to imagination. They turn vague stories into detailed accounts. They turn anxieties into structured testimonies. And Dietrich's orderly notes will later serve as the foundation for official trials. He does not mean to ignite anything, but by giving fear a process he gives it wings. The cloister's new manuscript. In a monastery perched on a windy hill above the sea, monks work on a new manuscript. It is meant to be a comprehensive guide to spiritual dangers, a compilation of sermons, scriptures, visions, and philosophical writings. But as the manuscript evolves, lines sharpen the idea of a pact with dark forces, the possibility of humans being used as instruments, the belief that witches can harm through intention alone, the need to protect communities through vigilance. This manuscript, copied and recopied, spreads across Europe like wildfire made of ink. Priests read it and preach with new urgency. Doctors read it and reinterpret symptoms. Teachers read it and pass these ideas to the next generation of clergy, where once there was ambiguity, now there is clarity. Where once people believed witchcraft was rare, now they believe it possible. Where once accusation required evidence, now it requires suspicion. The manuscript becomes the unseen architect of countless future tragedies, not because it encourages violence, but because it defines the vocabulary of fear. The festival that turned cold. In a valley surrounded by green hills, villagers gather for a festival marking the first harvest. They drink, they dance, they sing. But as dusk falls, a boy begins shouting incoherently. He claims he sees a black presence lurking near the festival fire. The laughter dies. His mother drags him aside. A group of men search the shadows but find nothing. Still the mood changes. People glance over their shoulders. A sudden gust of wind extinguishes one of the torches. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else mutters a name, a woman who did not attend the festival. No one confronts her. No one accuses her. But the village will remember this night. And remembrance is the first step toward collective action. The midwife who refused to bow her name is Albruna. She is respected by some, tolerated by others, feared by more than she realizes. For decades, she has delivered children, treated fevers, and tended to the dying. Her knowledge is deep, her manner brusque, her independence rare. But in this new century, independence is dangerous. When a newborn dies in the early hours of winter, the mother breaks down with grief. Neighbors gather. Someone whispers that Albruna's herbs smelled bitter. Someone else recalls she once refused to treat a wealthy family that mistreated her. The searchers arrive. Their questions are polite but pointed. Why did she choose those herbs? Why did she speak so sternly to the father? Has she ever seen strange lights at night? Does she pray alone? Albruna answers calmly, but she refuses to bow, refuses to accept suspicion as valid. This pride, admirable in another century, becomes her undoing. The searchers note her defiance. The villagers note her confidence. The priest notes her lack of tears. Though nothing is proven, she becomes the first person in the region to be formally watched, a quiet punishment, a warning disguised as caution. Her story spreads far beyond her village, becoming the earliest tale of a midwife whose knowledge might be dangerous. In time, this tale will return like a boomerang, feeding new suspicions elsewhere. Fear travels fast. Reputation travels faster. The moment the balance breaks, and then it happens. Not everywhere at once, not dramatically, but unmistakably. One community, battered by misfortune and sharpened by years of whispered fears, finally crosses a threshold. A child collapses during evening prayers. A villager recalls a woman staring into the church that morning. The priest, influenced by new manuscripts, interprets the event through the lens of spiritual danger. The searchers gather testimony. The magistrate opens an inquiry, and for the first time in this region, a woman is detained, not punished, not harmed, not tried, but detained. The villagers watch the process with a mix of relief and dread. Authorities feel they have acted responsibly. The church sees caution as virtue. Neighbors feel safer. Something has shifted. Detention becomes the first true hinge between suspicion and prosecution. A door has opened wider than ever before, and Europe stepping through without realizing it will never again retreat from the shadow it has begun to chase. The continent breathes in. By the end of this century, fear is no longer an unshaped cloud. It is a structure, a language, a system. People expect authorities to act. Authorities expect communities to report. The church expects vigilance. Scholars expect danger. Villagers expect the worst. The spark has found the kindling has found air, and the air is beginning to shimmer with the promise of fire. The storm is no longer approaching. It is here, gathered in the corners of courtrooms, in the margins of manuscripts, in the cautious eyes of villagers. Europe's breath is held, and soon it will exhale, the village that chose fire over fear. In the foothills of a mountain range battered by icy winds, a village endures a winter harsher than any in living memory. Crops failed early. Livestock starved. Children grew gaunt. Snow buried the world for months. The villagers gather inside the longhouse, breath turning to mist in the cold air. They speak of causes of sins of misfortune, of the village's growing moral decay. But someone mentions an old woman, a widow, who lives in a crooked cottage at the edge of the woods. She has survived the winter with surprising ease. Her fire burns long after others die. Her shelves are lined with herbs. She avoids the priest. One man says he saw her whisper into the wind 3 nights before the blizzard. Another claims she once cursed a neighbor during an argument. Another swears she walks outside before dawn speaking to the trees. None of this proves anything, but fear is no longer measured in proofs. It is measured in momentum. By morning, a group of men stand outside her door, torches in hand, their resolve hardened by desperation. She is dragged into the center of the village, trembling but silent. No formal trial, no magistrate, no cleric, just fear. A pyre is built with frozen logs and brittle brush. The villagers do not cheer, they do not gloat. They simply watch. When the flames rise, they turn away, some with relief, some with shame, all with the quiet certainty that they have protected themselves. This single act born of hunger and misery will echo for decades. It will be retold in neighboring valleys. It will be whispered by travelers. It will become a precedent. The first fire lit by ordinary hands, and such fires are easier to ignite the second time. The court that learned to accuse. Far from this village, in a growing town near a trade crossroads, magistrates gather for an extraordinary session. They have received too many reports, too many troubling notes from inspectors, too many letters from bishops urging vigilance. The time has come, they decide to move from passive listening to active inquiry. They outline a new protocol. Anyone suspected of harmful magic will be questioned formally. Testimonies from multiple villagers will be considered sufficient grounds. In cases of unclear guilt, the accused may be held for extended observation. Dreams, visions, and patterns of misfortune are now admissible. This is not yet the brutality that future centuries will unleash, but it is the first legal framework that legitimizes the idea of pursuing witches proactively. The magistrates believe they are acting responsibly, they believe they are defending their region, they believe they are aligning with the church. What they have truly done is cross a threshold. Justice is no longer reactive, it is hunting, and once a court learns to accuse, it rarely forgets. The Whispering Hills of Marbach. In the town of Marbach, situated among rolling green hills, children begin experiencing strange fits. They fall to the ground, shaking, mutter in half-formed sentences, point to corners where no one stands. Parents panic. Priests hold vigils. Merchants close their shops. Then the children begin naming a woman. Not the same woman, several different children mention her independently. They describe her walking near the river, her hair loose, her eyes distant. The villagers know her, Clara the potter's widow. Quiet, hard-working, solitary. She is brought before the priest, who asks her gentle questions. She denies harming anyone. She denies having gifts. She denies understanding the children's claims, but the children's voices carry the ring of innocence. And innocence is difficult to doubt. Clara is detained. Word spreads. Visitors arrive from neighboring parishes. Some say the children are gifted with divine sight. Others say they are afflicted by unseen spirits. Still others suggest the devil tests the town. The truth is simpler. Children absorb the fear of adults. They speak what adults cannot articulate. Their dreams echo the stories whispered behind closed doors. But medieval Europe does not yet understand this, so it listens, and Clara becomes one of the first victims of children's testimony, a pattern that will later devastate entire regions. The cleric's midnight revelation. In the cathedral town where stone towers rise above fog-soaked streets, a cleric named Father Arnulf spends the night in prayer. He is troubled. He has seen too many reports. He has read too many confessions. He has listened to too many villagers trembling as they recount strange events. He does not seek visions. He does not seek supernatural signs. But in the middle of the night, he feels a profound conviction settle into his bones. Witchcraft is not rare. It is rising. He writes furiously by candlelight, filling parchment with warnings, interpretations, theological arguments. He insists the devil has found new footholds in human hearts. He urges the church to form new councils. He recommends systematic inquiries. His writings spread across dioceses like embers on the wind. He does not intend harm, he intends vigilance, but his influence is immense and his timing catastrophic. For when the church adopts his ideas, the concept of hidden witches shifts from possibility to certainty. And certainty is the most dangerous fuel fear can possess. The night, the searchers knocked twice. In a cold region where forests press tightly against villages, searchers begin conducting nocturnal rounds, quietly, respectfully believing they are protecting their communities. But one night, they knock on the door twice. Not because they must, but because they want to. The woman who answers has long been considered odd. Her husband died young, her children left home. She walks alone at night gathering herbs. The searchers question her for hours. Her answers are ordinary, mundane even, but one of the searchers, anxious and eager to prove his value, notes her trembling hands. He interprets the tremor as guilt. Another interprets it as fear of exposure. A third notes that she did not meet their eyes consistently. Their notes generate suspicion. Suspicion becomes evidence. Evidence becomes recommendation. She is taken into custody without a formal accusation. The villagers say little. Silence is safer. And in that silence, a new precedent is born. A person may be seized not for what she has done, but for what her demeanor suggests. The machinery of accusation is now fully operational. The first confession. It happens in a dim chamber of a regional court, a place where cold air gathers like a second witness. A woman, exhausted by days of questioning, deprived of rest and overwhelmed by terror, breaks down. She confesses, not because she is guilty, but because she wants the questioning to stop, because she wants mercy, because she believes, after enough pressure, that perhaps she truly has offended God without knowing how. Her confession is fragmented, uncertain, but it is enough. The court records it, the priest signs it, the magistrate seals it, and Europe changes forever. For once, a confession exists. Once words of guilt enter the permanent record. Once someone admits to serving dark forces, the idea of witches becomes undeniable. This confession travels across towns faster than caravans. It is retold in taverns, whispered in churches, expanded in retellings. It becomes proof. Proof becomes precedent. Precedent becomes policy. Policy becomes expectation. From this moment on, courts across Europe will look not for innocence, but for echoes of this confession. The age of small fires has begun. Soon it will become a wildfire. The continent exhales. By the end of this century, the transformation is complete. Villages have burned their first suspects. Courts have created procedures. Clergy have issued warnings. Children have shaped testimonies. Searchers have detained innocents. scholars have given fear theoretical grounding. And the first confession stands as a monument to future accusations. Europe does not yet know what it has unleashed. It only knows that fear has become certainty. Certainty has become action. Action has become momentum. The storm is no longer forming. It is here, alive, crackling, searching for fuel. And in the next century it will grow into a force so vast that even the heavens will seem to tremble. The candles shudder violently now, not because of wind, but because history has taken its deepest breath. The hunts that became normal. In a valley surrounded by thick forests, winter hangs like a weight over the land. The villagers gather around a central bonfire, not for warmth or festival, but to watch the first of several accused stand before the magistrate. No one is surprised, no one protests. They have watched the world shift. The accused are a shepherd who dreamed of wolves, a weaver whose husband died suddenly, a girl whose laughter is too wild, an old man who knows how to read the weather. None of them are guilty, but guilt is no longer the measure. The measure is fear, and fear has declared these individuals unsafe. The magistrate questions them with practiced solemnity. The priest offers prayers. The searchers present their notebooks. Neighbors recount dreams, memories, impressions. The process is orderly, civic, almost peaceful. And that is what makes it horrifying. The villagers do not thirst for blood. They long for safety. They believe removing dangerous individuals will restore balance. Fear has reached its peak. It now masquerades as rationality. The hunts no longer shock anyone. They are expected, and expectation makes them unstoppable. The record keepers. In the court archives of a mid-sized town, scribes sit in rows, quills scratching across parchment. They are not chroniclers of war or diplomacy. They are recorders of accusation. Every whisper, every testimony, every strange dream, every perceived omen, every confession, voluntary or coerced. The scribes work quietly, dutifully, believing they serve justice, but their ledgers become the machinery of tragedy. A name written once becomes easier to write again. A suspicion recorded becomes harder to dismiss. A pattern noted becomes justification for broader action. These archives will survive centuries. They will be studied by scholars who marvel at their precision and despair at their content. But for now, the scribes only know they are busy, too busy, and the pile of reports never shrinks. The hunts have become self-sustaining, fed by ink as much as fear. The church that walked a narrow line. Clergy across Europe feel themselves caught between two duties: to preserve spiritual truth and to calm the anxieties of the people. Some priests plead for mercy. Others preach vigilance. Some bishops condemn the excesses. Others encourage them. The church is not a monolith. It is a landscape of competing interpretations. But one idea becomes dominant. Witchcraft is a wound in the spiritual fabric of the world and must be purged. This belief fuels sermons in cold stone churches, echoing off columns and vaults, settling into the minds of villagers and magistrates alike. Confession becomes central. Spiritual cleansing becomes imperative. Accusation becomes a form of devotion. And each denunciation is seen as a necessary act to protect the soul of the community. The church believes it is fighting darkness, but the true darkness is the shrinking space left for compassion. In this century, theology becomes tinder, the darkness at the edge of the field. In a lonely hamlet surrounded by vast fields of barley, a boy runs into the night screaming. He claims he saw a woman standing at the far edge of the field, illuminated by the moon. She beckoned to him. Her hand was crooked. Her eyes were hollow. The villagers rush out with torches searching. They find nothing. But the story spreads. Like a spark carried by wind, it leaps from home to home. A woman at the edge of the field, a beckoning hand, hollow eyes. The villagers quickly assign a face to the tale, a widow who keeps to herself. No one speaks to her. No one warns her. No one tries to understand. They simply wait. And when misfortune next strikes a sick goat, a broken leg, a failed harvest, the widow becomes the vessel for the community's grief. No court intervenes. No official inquiry is needed. She disappears one night. Whether she fled, was taken, or died quietly in the fields is never known. Her absence becomes a warning. In the villages of this century, disappearance becomes a quiet form of justice. The town that burned for certainty. A prosperous town near a major trade route is struck by a devastating fire. Half the market square collapses in flames. Merchants lose fortunes, families lose homes, children are pulled from smoky rooms. The people demand an explanation, a spark from a hearth, a careless lantern, a lightning strike. The magistrate refuses to accept these mundane causes. The loss is too great, the damage too deep, the grief too heavy. He convenes an emergency tribunal. Accusations emerge like a flood. A jealous rival in the market, a woman seen near the square the night before, a foreign traveller whose prayers sound strange, a young man who read books the villagers do not understand. The tribunal listens, it asks questions, it detains suspects, and then, unable to find a culprit who satisfies the magnitude of the tragedy, it condemns 3 people. 1 will be hanged, 2 will burn. The executions are carried out publicly. The townspeople gather, believing they witness a cleansing. But when the flames rise, the smoke carries not relief, but a quiet ache that seeps into the bones of the town. The fire is out, but something deeper has burned away. A piece of Europe's conscience. The quiet resistors. Amid the hunts, a few brave souls speak softly against the current. A monk in a remote abbey writes letters condemning the excesses. A physician argues that illness, not magic, causes strange fits. A village elder warns that accusations tear communities apart. A midwife urges mercy for those who live differently. A magistrate questions the value of forced confessions. Their voices are calm, rational, gentle. They offer explanations rooted in knowledge rather than fear. But the century does not listen. Not yet. Their words fall on ears too frightened to hear reason. Their warnings fade behind the roar of collective certainty. But they plant seeds, seeds that future centuries will harvest. For even in the darkest moments of Europe's night, wisdom whispers, and wisdom persists. The long night begins to break. Towards the end of this century, the hunts begin to slow, not because fear has lessened, but because exhaustion has spread. Villages are weary, courts are overwhelmed, clergy are conflicted, communities have lost too many neighbors. Questions begin to surface. How many witches can one town contain? How many confessions can be trusted? How many tragedies can be blamed on shadows? These questions do not end the hunts, but they open cracks in the certainty that sustained them. Light begins to seep through, not enough to illuminate the path ahead, but enough to soften the edges of fear. The hunts will continue for generations. They will spread across oceans. They will leave an indelible mark on human memory. But the darkest century has passed. Europe slowly exhales, uncertain, trembling, seeking a way back to reason. The candles flicker less violently now. Not because the storm has ended, but because dawn, faint and distant, has begun to form behind the mountains. The saga's final breath. The world you have travelled through in these 10 parts is gone now, its fears, its doctrines, its certainties, swallowed by time. But the lessons remain. Fear grows from misunderstanding. Authority strengthens fear when it loses humility. Communities fracture when they trade compassion for suspicion. Knowledge can be a cure or a weapon, and every age must guard its conscience as fiercely as its borders. The medieval world of witches and wizards was never truly about magic. It was about human beings searching for meaning in suffering and sometimes finding terrible answers. Tonight, as the wind softens and the old fires cool, the candles no longer tremble. The room grows quiet. The fears of centuries fade like smoke, and Europe finally begins to wake from the longest night it ever endured.